Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Hilary Dickman, a parent of two and Senior Assistant Director of Admission at Colorado College.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. This week in the news, Hilary will join me and answer a question from a listener who wants to know, how can I tell if a college has a commuter culture? Next, Stephen Burd from New America will continue to share his research on how colleges are saddling low-income students with expensive parent loans. Finally, Susan Tree will join me for the final part of our interview with Kelly Walter, who is in year 45 at Boston University, and she helps us to understand Boston University. Friends, before we dive into today's episode, just a few important announcements. First of all, our Colorado meet and greet is 5 weeks away. That's right. And it just seems to get better all the time. Allison McMahon is going to be joining now from Elon University, or regional in the area. We also know Kate Strickland from CU Boulder will be there. Hilary Dickman will be there from Colorado College, and Grace Robertson Lloyd. Now, those are the ladies who did the original case studies. I have to shout out Sheridan Budin, who's put in so much work into this. I'm on the email exchanges, and I'm telling you, the ladies are working really, really hard to deliver you guys a real quality program. I was excited to see a couple people, at least so far, flying in. I see people are flying in from Rhode Island and Ohio so far. If you can do that, I think it'll be well worth it. If it's a longer drive, it'll be well worth it as well. But you want to sign up, and you sign up by going to yourcollegeboundkid.com, going to the events page, and you can't miss the Colorado event. Look forward to seeing you there. I won't be there, but I'm excited to hear about it. All right, friends, I've got an admissions tip that I'm going to give you today. I'm just warning you, is going to be at the end of the question from a listener with Hilary. And then at the end, when I do the preview for 620, I'm going to attempt an analogy. You know, sometimes they fall flat, sometimes they work. So we'll see if that one works.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Hilary, we're getting great questions lately. This is another good one. I'm going to play it and get your insights.
Hi, Mark and everyone. I am trying to figure out an easy way, if there is one, to determine what percentage of students on a campus are commuters and what percentage are living on or near the campus. And I get caught up with the numbers that say what percentage of students live on campus, because I know at some schools, students move off campus to apartments nearby sophomore or junior year, but they really still center their lives around that campus identity, as opposed to some other schools where you really do have a large commuter community, and those students have jobs and other family duties, and it's just going to be a very different experience for students who might be coming from out of state to go to school there. My student is an athlete, and we are starting from the base of which schools offer her sport, and now we're trying to figure out which ones will fulfill other needs. And so knowing that the school is going to have a robust community identity is important to us. So any suggestions you have would be greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much. You're always very helpful.
Take it away.
This is a good one because you really can't uncover this just from statistics alone. It does require some digging. So, I think this is one where it really helps to ask questions either on campus or in a Zoom with students who go to the school that you're looking at, or students maybe from your high school who go there, or the families of students who go to that school. I used to teach at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. This was back in the early 2000s, from like 2006 to 2011. And when I was teaching there, it was definitely more of a commuter campus. There were a lot of students who were from the Colorado Springs community and living at home. And since then, they've built a bunch of dorms, and there is still a commuter feel to it. But there are also a lot of out-of-state students and students from all over Colorado who go to UCCS and who are like part of the community there, even if they live off campus, and a lot more students living in dorms. So one thing I would say is you want sort of the most up-to-date information, right? Like my experience at UCCS in the early 2000s is not going to be the same as what students are experiencing there now. So when you're asking these questions, make sure you're asking students who are either there currently or are very recent graduates, not people who went 10 or 15 years ago, because especially at schools where there has been a history of a commuter community, things may have changed recently. And then I guess the other thing that I would suggest is to kind of follow on social media and see like what are the activities and events that are happening at that campus, and does it seem like they are things that are keeping students, even if they live a few blocks from campus, that students are going to be on campus and around for, because I think that can be really clarifying. I hadn't really thought about this for a long time, but my other kind of personal experience was when I was in graduate school at Arizona State. I was coming from Miami University in Oxford. Oxford is a super rural place. Everyone lives either on campus or very close to campus. Like your life is built around campus at Miami. And I got to Arizona State and found out that there were kids who were commuting like 20 minutes or longer. They were living up in Scottsdale in apartments and driving down, and everybody had to deal with finding parking on campus. And I was like, what? This is a thing? Everybody doesn't live like in a walkable, like you can't just walk to campus every day. I was shocked. And these were undergraduates. Like these were kids I was teaching who were in their first year of school. And I was really surprised. So I think that even in schools where I would have assumed that it was more of an on-campus kind of lifestyle, and certainly kids are coming back to campus for the football games and things like that at ASU, but it's not the same kind of community that you find at a Miami, in Oxford, Ohio, or schools where you don't have a choice because the only thing going on is what's happening on campus. So really looking at their social media, talking with the students directly, finding out who the admission ambassadors are. And you can usually find them on the school's website, and like asking them to have a conversation, obviously visiting the campus, which I know not everybody can do, but you can sort of get a feel for it on campus, and doing sort of the Mark Stucker approach where you just stop and ask kids anywhere on campus and in the dining hall. And I think that's how you're going to get your best answer. This is definitely not something you're going to get from statistics.
I mean, all those things you said are good. I do feel the percentage of students that live on campus is an important statistic. That's just my opinion in terms of giving a sense of the community feel, especially when we're talking about extremes. If you're going to say, oh, it's 55 versus 45, okay. No, but if it's 90% here and it's 15 over here, that's very significant.
Yes.
And there's some great sources for that. Like you can go to iPads has a document called Source of Truth where they have like raw numbers on all this kind of thing. College Navigator has this information. Common Data Set, which we talk about a lot. Section F1 has that. Big Future, like a lot of the aggregators niche that really aggregate and pull data from Common Data Set and make it maybe simple and easy so you don't have to spend as much time. This is a commonly reported statistic. Another thing that I think oftentimes speaks to culture is what the school's requirement is for on-campus living. So some schools have no requirement at all for freshmen, and then you can have everything to like your Davidsons or your Connecticut colleges have like a 4-year residential requirement. And then some have 3 and some have 2. Like that speaks to something because those schools feel like it's so valuable to have that campus requirement there that they're making it, I mean, to have that culture that they're making a requirement. And sometimes there's fine print that says if you live within 20 minutes or something, you're exempt from that. But I think that's telling whether a school has a requirement for online or residential. What's harder is what she brought in, the more nuance. Like if you're off campus but you're close to the school, then you can still tap into a lot of the community feel. That's different than what you said, Scottsdale, Arizona State, right? Like
Yeah,
both of my daughters ended up 2 years on, 2 years off. Karis was she lucked into because Davidson has a strict 4 year
right.
requirement. But when she went abroad her junior year and came back, they had over enrolled the housing.
Yep.
So she got the junior year kind of that way. And then one of her roommates did a petition because it can be cheaper to live with four people like in a apartment than on campus and have mandatory meals and housing. And one of them petitioned that the extra cost was going to be problematic, and she kind of won her appeal. So Karis kind of ended up getting 2 years on, 2 years. Well, it really wasn't two because she was in Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. So she had 1.5, I guess, on. But those requirements, they say a lot to me, whether it's a very community oriented school. Like I can almost always, if I visit a school that has a high percentage residential, like I will feel it right away.
Yeah.
I will feel that.
But I think you can also have that. Like I just looked up UC Berkeley to see what their
Mm-hmm.
percentage on campus is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, according to my very fast search, they're only at 28% of students living on campus. And I know from growing up there and going to Cal games and being around the campus there a lot that it had a really great kind of cohesive feel. And so that's one place where, I mean, I think there are probably a lot of schools like that where that stat of 28% of students live on campus isn't really giving you the information that you're looking for. The other thing that I would say is a difference is there are some schools where students are going to be living with their parents and going to campus for their classes, and then they're going to go to their job in the afternoon, and then they're going to go home and live with their parents. And that's also a very different feel from even an ASU where kids might be commuting to Scottsdale, but they're living in an apartment complex that was built for students, and the whole place it's probably just one big party, right? I mean, I don't know. That's the feel that I had when I was there. But you're getting sort of the feel of being with young people, not the same as being at a place where the events are happening on campus. So there are a lot of different sort of personalities to these colleges, and I can see why the caller is like having a hard time differentiating between them. I agree with you that the percentage living on campus or the requirement to live on campus your first year is a big part of it. Obviously, a 3 or 4 year live on campus requirement tells you a lot about how the school is trying to sort of sculpt the student experience. But I think that once you start talking with current students or recent grads or families of current students, you get a much better feel for even like what happens on the weekends, right? Does the campus empty out because everybody lives 45 minutes, their home is 45 minutes away and they're going home to their parents' house for the weekends? I think that getting those kinds of answers can really give you a feel for whether life at the school is centered on what's happening on campus, or if life is centered 20 minutes away, or if life is really like individual and these kids are pretty much still like living the same life that they had in high school and just going to campus every day.
No, you bring up a lot of really good points. One of them is just it's a difference is most of the student body, say in that sort of, let's just say 18 to 24 range versus are there a lot of non-traditional students that might be 32 and they're working part-time and they're commuting, like that's a different culture. I love your point about weekends and how they empty out or don't empty out. Another big one is the student body more of a national student body versus a local student body? Like if I take a school here in Georgia, Kennesaw State, it's one of our stronger public schools. But it is very much got a commuter and local commuter vibe about it, right? There's a lot of the students that like there's way more, they're building up their campus housing and they're making really nice campus housing. They're putting a lot of money into that, but it's still overwhelmingly commuter. And the majority of the people are, Georgia residents that live like within an hour away. And that's also different, I feel, than if you have like larger international communities or larger, a larger domestic nationality. And then your other point too, like I always bring this point up when people are asking me a lot of questions like around diversity. Um, and a lot of times I'll get a question from someone like they want to make sure there's enough people like them.
Mm.
And like them might be Jewish, like them might be South Asian, like them might be Black, or it might be Latino, like it's different things, or Southeast Asian. And they just kind of want to know, like, I don't want to be the only one. And one of the things I like to point out to them is they need to not only look at percentage, but they do need to look at number of people. So I thought about that when you brought up your Berkeley example. So 28% is a low number, but Berkeley's a large school.
Yes.
So it still means there's a still sizable number of people on campus, like more than 8,000 or whatever that is, if you do the math. And then, you live together and you bond with them. And so that's kind of an important component to look at as well, is it's not only percentage, but it's also what is the raw number, because that's just a lot more people for you to find people that you're compatible with.
For sure.
Yeah. I think newspapers and alumni magazines, things like that can be great here. Social media. Yeah, my plop on campus and talk to people is amazing. I think probably my favorite session I ever had doing that was at Berkeley last year.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
Oh, 3 hours just talking to students.
I bet.
And it was fascinating.
That's awesome.
To hear their different takes on things. They're real thinkers on that campus. And so they had really good, but they were so friendly. Some of them gave me so much of the time. So that is great. But I also understand the practicality of doing that is not always that easy, right? I don't like to give people.
But I think if you've got, if there are 3 or 4 schools that have really piqued your interest and you're like, ooh, I think this could be a great fit, but I want to make sure that the feel is residential, that's not too much to ask. That's a 15 or 20 minute Zoom with one of their admission ambassadors or a friend of a friend who goes there, or whatever. Like it's not a huge lift to be able to know that you want to include or remove that school from your list.
Yeah, and especially when you juxtapose it to the amount of work and time and money and resources and angst that's involved in transferring. If you
goodness, yeah.
If you don't get the fit right.
Right.
I remember one study showed that the average transfer ends up with 27 more credits, which is basically a year,
Yeah.
Like, so putting a little time on the front end to make sure the fit is right is a lot better than all the consternation of what you go through if you end up having to.
For sure.
All right, friends. I told you I had an admissions tip for you. Hillary knows me. She knows my favorite thing to do on campus is to informally ask a minimum of 10 students a series of questions that gets to the culture of the school and the experience of the students. I just finished doing that at UMiami 10 days ago, and I'm excited that Lisa and I will be recording a College Spotlight old version, March 24th. Yep, we just put that on the calendar. And part of it is for me to reveal to you what I learned from randomly talking to a bunch of students. But if you're a regular listener, that's nothing new. You've heard that from me ad nauseum. What I want to give you for the admissions tip today is a little different twist. As much as I swear by the extemporaneous on-site visit, the random asking of students questions, let's face it, it isn't always practical for many people for multiple reasons. Sometimes you run into a problem because you can't afford to visit the college when you want to visit, to ask the students the timely questions. Or, and this is quite common, you only get so much time off and you're trying to jam visits in. So you're doing 2 visits in the same day. You can barely make it to tour number 2 without being late. So you just don't have the ability to have 30 minutes to an hour to just randomly talk to students. Third barrier is you're just too shy to just go up and approach people. The fourth thing is you're just not really sure what to ask. So for all these reasons, as much as I love it, most people don't end up having on-site, in-person conversations with students not assigned to you from the admission office, at least 10, before you leave the campus to really get a feel for the place. So let me share a great workaround. Start with your network. Who do you know at the college? Say, I don't know anybody. Just start asking people. Why don't you start with your school counselor? Start with other people at your school. Just start tapping into your network. By the way, we're always talking about what can parents do in this process. This is a great parent project. Now, once you find 1, 2, or 3 students, ask if they'd be willing to talk to either you, if you're the student, or if it's a parent, to your student for 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I'm talking about from your home. It doesn't even have to be Zoom or FaceTime. It can be, if that's convenient. It can be a good old-fashioned phone call. And after you have that conversation, and don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, by the way. I don't recommend starting out with the tough ones. Give them a softball early, but then don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Tell them you're going to shoot them a few bucks on Venmo for their time. Now, my recommendation is $1 a minute. So if you had a 15-minute call, shoot them $15. You have a 20-minute call, shoot them a 20. Now, if they say you don't have to do that, just push back. Let them know your parent's the one who's going to be sending you the money anyway, and this is something that we want to do, just to say thank you. They're going to appreciate it. They are. And they're much more likely to embrace it if they don't think you as the student, the one talking to them, is reaching into your own pocket and giving them 15 or 20. Now, if they're extremely adamant about not taking it, then and only then drop it. You don't want to come off as argumentative or get obnoxious with them. Just read the room. But they are college students. Many of them are broke. And even if they aren't broke, the kind gestures are going to be appreciated. All right. After you've told them you're going to shoot them that little cash, ask if they know of any other students who would be willing to talk to you. And let the student know, like, my parents are happy to give them, 15 or 20 bucks as well, just, out of respect for their time. Shoot them some money on Venmo, Cash App, whatever. The reason why this is important is because there's a really good chance the student is going to say, you know what, let me ask around. And if I come up with someone, I'll text you. And you want them to be able to talk you up and say, you know what, family's going to give you a little bit of money for your time. They're much more likely to be able to get back to you with a couple more students. And you can repeat this as much as you want till you get enough people that you feel like, I really feel like I've gotten the student perspective. I really feel like I have an inside take on the school. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. If I do this to 6 or 7 people, that's $100. To which I would say, how much does it cost you to select the wrong college? And you either have a very average experience or you transfer. Like Hill and I were talking about a few minutes ago. The average transfer graduates with 27 extra credits last time I checked. Basically 30 credits for a full year, right? So you're talking about the 5-year plan. That's not even talking about all the angst, trepidation, trauma of uprooting all your friends and moving and just all that's involved in that. I'm just talking about purely a whole entire extra year added to your college experience. So how expensive is that compared to a couple $100? Now, another option is you just do what I'm saying with your final 2 or 3 schools. So you're down to your final decision. You can't decide between 2 or 3 schools. It's going to be worth it to spend a couple $100 to help you make the right decision. I can assure you it's less than the cost of one flight. Yeah, so this was a fun one. Is there anything we didn't cover?
I don't think so. That feels like everything to me.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for calling in, listener. Send us more questions. This was a good one.
Yep, great one.
All right, friends, let's transition to my interview with Stephen Burd, senior writer and researcher for New America. We're talking about his blockbuster article that's creating a lot of buzz out there.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, time for part 2 of 3 of my interview with Stephen Burd, senior writer and researcher for New America, an educational think tank that puts out some really thought-provoking reports as they attempt to have a real positive impact on the higher ed landscape. In part 2, Stephen elaborates on the Parent Plus loans. Stephen discusses if non-need-based aid or merit money is appropriate for schools to give out. Stephen explains how the Wall Street Journal inspired him to do more research on this topic on their breathtaking report they did on Baylor about 5 years ago. And Steve and I discuss how the vicious cycle that's out there that is impacting enrollment managers and how things have changed a lot. Listen and enjoy.
I mean, the other really important part on this is that colleges are not held accountable if borrowers default on the loans. So under the federal student loan program, they put together default rates every year, and a college that has where a large number of students continually default on their loans, they can lose access to the federal aid programs. There's no such thing for parent loans, and as a result, I mean, I find it kind of amazing just how blasé universities, colleges are in indebting people with these loans, particularly low-income families. And as I said, when they created the PLUS loan programs in the 1980s, they never, ever expected them to go to policymakers. It was never their intent for this to be a financing tool for low-income families.
Stephen, talk about how in your article, you talk about this, about how student loans are not absolvable through bankruptcy and the powers of the federal government. Talk about that as well. That's another compounding factor.
One of the reasons that low-income families should never take out PLUS loans, in a lot of cases, they're never going to be able to repay them. And the federal government has extraordinary collection practices. They will garnish your wages. They will seize part of your Social Security check. So if you're an older parent or a grandparent who takes out these PLUS loans and you default on them, you're going to lose part of your Social Security payments. And, you may not have very much else to live on. And they can also take tax refunds and stuff like that.
And they're not absolvable through bankruptcy. So if you think of somebody who struggles with a car payment or a house payment or credit card debt or a failed business, they file bankruptcy and can have that absolved. These are not absolved. Dollars are not absolvable through bankruptcy.
Right. So, I mean, part of the point of this paper is that, universities should not be loading low-income families with debt that they can't afford. That's going to put them in financial jeopardy. We actually call it predatory inclusion, in that they are helping students go to college, but then the family is taking on so much financial risk that that decision could really come back to bite them.
So, Stephen, talk about the research you used to come up with your 41 schools. And as you say in the article, it's not only 41 schools. You use some pretty conservative criteria to decide who are the most flagrant violators, where it could have been a lot more if you would have broadened your criteria. But why don't you talk about the research that went into that? Because you didn't just willy-nilly grab names out of a straw. This was very scientifically selected. So why don't you share that research?
Yeah, so I did want to be extremely conservative in choosing the schools. I didn't want schools to be able to come back, and I didn't want to be wrong. So I really only went with the ones that where I felt that the evidence was overwhelming. And the first part of it was the U.S. Department of Education. It has a college scorecard in which they have a wide range of data about different things. And one of the criteria that they've added in the last few years that made this possible is you can see the share of PLUS loan borrowers at each school who are Pell Grant recipients, who are the families of Pell Grant recipients. And you can see how much those families borrow. So that was the beginning, just to look at that data.
And listeners, most of our listeners know this, but I mean, Pell looks at income and assets, but think of it as like the 35% of lowest income families. When you look at income and assets, that's going to be Pell. I know maybe a little higher now because they brought in Pell a little bit, but I know it was like 33% when I last looked at it.
We use that as a proxy. That's the best proxy for low income. But what I wanted to look at also was financial aid data. So I started off with 300 schools, and I went through I think it's about 20 years of financial aid data, institutional aid data for each of the schools, looking at, number one, whether they give out a lot of non-need-based aid. That's a good sign that they are leveraging their aid. Looking at the percent of need that they meet. In general, if a school is meeting 100% need, they're not going to make the list. There were a couple of exceptions, and I do wonder how those schools judge are making their calculations. But in general, it's I think the average was about 75%. And then one of the biggest indicators is the average net price data. The education department collects data on the average net price of the lowest income families are charged. So there was a threshold, I think, of at least 12,000 that I used with the schools, because once you get to a certain level, you can use federal loans, you can use other things, but at a certain level, you have no choice but to generally take out a PLUS loan. And anyway, I used all of this financial aid data, and that's how I narrowed down the schools.
And from my standpoint, giving money away that's non-need based isn't inherently wrong. And I say that because, I said this recently on a podcast. Once you get up over six figures, it's not uncommon for 46% of your income after taxes to go to a college the way they calculate the formula. So you have families saying, okay, the formula says I should be able to pay 90, but the formula doesn't look at higher cost areas and things like that. So you got someone like, I live in Manhattan, I live in San Francisco, there's no way. So I don't inherently have a problem with the school giving away non-need based aid. And I also don't have a problem with schools that don't meet 100% of need, because it just takes extraordinary amounts of money to be able to do that. That's why like 3% of colleges can do it. Where I have the problem is hoodwinking, bamboozling low-income families and putting them in a situation where they're taking out loan debt that's just completely not sustainable. And I think you were smart to focus on that.
Well, what I was trying to do with the financial aid data was just to figure out which schools appeared to be leveraging all their aid. And so you would look at the mix of non-need to need aid, and where non-need based aid dominates. But what's interesting with financial aid leveraging is that it can use all of the aid. So need-based aid doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to the lowest income students. It could be going to students who are at a very expensive school who have financial need just because it's a very expensive school and they've got a couple of kids in college. But anyway, but generally I was using the aid information to try to figure out which schools were leveraging. And then I had the PLUS loan information in terms of, how many were a lot of where the majority of students or close to that were Pell Grant PLUS loan borrowers, were Pell Grant recipients. And then the average net price data that shows the funding gaps that the low-income students are facing. So there are a number of schools that, where low-income families are facing $20,000, $25,000 have funding gaps that large. And so I wanted to be clear, that these were schools that were leaving low-income families with very large funding gaps because they were leveraging their aid.
So what's been the response, Stephen? I know this just hit and there's a lot of buzz. A lot of our listeners sent this to me asking me if we could talk about it on the podcast. So I was thrilled that you and I had already had plans to talk about this for months.
Can I bring up something else? One other thing I forgot to mention.
Sure.
The reason why I decided to go in this direction was, or to investigate this, was in 2021, the Wall Street Journal actually did their own reporting and found that Baylor University in Texas was steering students to plus loans, steering low-income families to plus loans. And they wrote up, like a front page story on it. They didn't quite get into detail about financial aid leveraging and stuff, but that's where I felt like my value add was in why is this happening? What happened at Baylor was because they were confronted by Wall Street Journal reporters, the president actually apologized, which is something that you very rarely see, where they basically admitted that they had been acting somewhat irresponsibly, and that they were going to change their policies so that they were going to do more counseling with applicants if they felt that an applicant couldn't afford to come, to offer alternatives. And then they decided to waive tuition for families making $50,000 or less. So I was pretty impressed, that there had been, that there had been movement and that had caused. Now, the Wall Street Journal article mentioned that there were other wealthy private universities that were also doing this, and they named a few, such as Syracuse, Texas Christian, and I'm not sure what the other one was off the top of my head, but they named a few. And and through my research, I saw that this was not just a private college thing, but I wanted to try to say, okay, so who are these others? Because even though they named these other institutions, those institutions did not respond because they were not the focus of the piece and they weren't in the headline. And so my feeling was that we had to bring the same level of attention to these other universities.
Yeah, and in your New America article, you go through, you mention especially a lot of some Southern flagships that there's no incentive in the state legislature at all to fund public schools with the tax base. If you get a surplus, then you give a tax cut. You don't invest it in public schools. And then they've turned to not only recruiting wealthy families and giving them a discount, but also using some of these tactics. And you guys will have to read the article because Stephen doesn't pull punches. He names names. He goes through. And
the University of Alabama did exactly what Baylor was doing, and even more so maybe. So I felt like that was important to point out.
And people have taken note of Alabama increasing their enrollment by almost 10,000, and they will often brag. I've gone to a lot of events with them, and they'd say 41% of our incoming kids have a 30 on the ACT, compared to, quote stats from 10 or 15 years ago, because of, targeting affluent areas in your recruitment and then giving a merit-based scholarship to somebody, but they're still paying triple the tuition if they're out of state.
Yeah.
So they get face value, let's just say 30 instead of 10, but then they give somebody 15. Or then they always dangle out some really large awards, which then drives more and more people to apply. And you've kind of gone over that vicious cycle.
And to have like a public universities doing this, having public universities loading low-income families with plus loan debt, just to me, I mean, it's bad enough that there are privates that are doing this, but publics, first of all, they educate so many more students, and their history of the public universities were the ones that were the gateways to the middle class. So for them to be putting low-income families in harm's way, I think is a real tragedy.
Yeah, I think when I go back and I think of all those incentives and all the pressures on the chief enrollment officers, VPs of enrollment, those on the enrollment management side, I don't hear very many people talk about the priority of increased social mobility at the core of the school, like you once used to hear. I have a theory that the research you've done needs to lead to you coming to Congress and speaking to Congress. Because I feel like without accountability, it won't happen. Friends, this concludes part 2 of 3 of my interview with Stephen Burd, senior writer and researcher for New America, a think tank organization dedicated to helping and shaking up the world of higher ed. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part. All right, friends, let's transition to the final part of my interview with Susan Tree and me interviewing Kelly Walter, who has to love this work. And she also has to love BU, Boston University, because this is year 45 for Kelly at BU. You don't do something for 45 years unless you love it. Kelly's the Associate Vice President for Enrollment and the Dean of Admissions.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, in part 2 of Susan Tree and my interview with Kelly Walter, the Associate Vice President of Enrollment and the Dean of Admissions at Boston University, who's been there in her 5th decade, Kelly continues telling us more about the BU Hub, and she shares 2 of what she calls BU's capacities. Then she tells us more about what the BU Cross College Challenge is. Kelly explains to us what the first-year research project is. Kelly answers a question that many of my students have a very different opinion of, and it's simply this: does Boston University have a campus? And finally, Kelly tells us how Boston University intentionally creates community when it's such a large university. Listen and enjoy. So speaking of your curriculum, you underwent a pretty significant change, right? A little less than 10 years ago, BU Hub.
Yes.
Tell us about BU Hub and what's the BU Cross College Challenge? Tell us a little bit about both of those things.
So the BU Hub really was born out of the premise that most colleges and universities in the United States have a portion of their curriculum that's general education. BU did, again, most colleges and universities do. And as we thought about it, not only is that idea of general education feel very dated, but we wanted to have our students have a common shared experience, regardless of whether you're studying biomedical engineering, journalism, or theater arts. And in order to do that, we decided to create this program called the BU Hub. And the BU Hub is a series of mostly interdisciplinary courses that allows students to develop a set of skills that we feel are critical for success in this increasingly complex and global world in which we live. How students complete the Hub is very individual. It's not a series of mandated required courses that all of our 17,000 undergraduates take, but it is a selection of courses in 6 key areas that we feel are those required. We call them capacities, but I'm going to call them skills that all students should have, and that will help to define and distinguish what a BU degree is. And so, for example, one of those skills, of course, is communications, right? And that's both written as well as oral. It's persuasive communications. So students could select to take an English writing class. They could choose to take a public speaking class. They could decide to take a social media class. And so they're going to learn about different forms of communication, obviously critical, whatever a student decides to do. We also think it's really important to expose students to civic engagement and global citizenship. So that's another one of the capacities that's required. And so those are just 2 of the 6, but the BU Hub is something all students, both first year and transfers, will need to complete over the course of their 4 years. That's the other thing that I think distinguishes the BU Hub. You often think of general education as something you take in the first or second year of college.
Right.
This actually spans the entire 4 years of someone's undergraduate study, or 3 typically if they're a transfer. So they can spread these courses out throughout their entire undergraduate experience at BU. The Cross College Challenge is really the BU Hub's signature course. It's project based and it is open to juniors and seniors. So it is something students take in the latter part of their 4 years at BU. And it is a course where students work with faculty, other students, and even staff to explore a complex real world problem. And I'll give you an example of a project students did this past year. You know how in a lot of cities there are those blue bikes that are available where you can
Sure.
hop on a bike? And so students decided to take this on as a project because they wanted to enhance pedestrian safety in the city of Boston and explore adding additional speed humps throughout the city of Boston. So it's just one example among many that students do during the course of the BU Hub.
And talk to us about the first year outreach project.
FISOP, the first year student outreach project. It's my favorite program at BU. And honestly, I would encourage every student to do it. I think it's a must for a couple of reasons. So BU at its core really has service as part of our mission statement. Over the past 10 years, our students have done over 1 million hours of service.
Wow.
Not just the BU community, but the greater Boston community. So it's really, really important. It's part of our DNA. And so the first year student outreach program is designed to introduce incoming first year students to that DNA that we have at BU and to get them involved in service as part of their orientation. So they spend a full day going out into the city of Boston. They can sign up for a wide variety of projects if they want to work with the homeless, if they want to work with HIV, AIDS, if they want to work with literacy projects, which is one of our pet projects at the university. And it not only exposes them and introduces them to the city of Boston so they feel a little bit more comfortable getting out, but it's a great way to make friends, right? When you arrive at the university and there's 3,500 students in your first year class, figuring out how to navigate that, but it brings students together. And many students will say they're best friends at the university they met through FISOP.
Wow.
Get involved right from the beginning.
Yep.
And it's just a great foundation for your years at BU.
And is it just the one semester, Kelly, or is it just a project depending?
Well, FISOP is done in conjunction with orientation. So it is for students when they're first arriving, but we obviously have a community service office at the university. Those students who want to continue to do service, which many of them do, can do that throughout their entire 4 years at the university. We have alternative spring breaks where students go around the globe and do service projects. So it is something that hopefully by doing FISOP, they will continue to do. It's not a one and done.
That's wonderful. And it sets a standard for the kind of the mission of the university. You know, this is important.
Yes.
That we're going to put it up front and infuse it into the student's experience. Because, you know, with college students, if you don't get them plugged into something pretty quickly, they find their little, hole, their safe place, and they may be less inclined. It's like you want to catch them when that learning curve is starting up. I think that's just wonderful.
It's great. And I think many students don't expect a program like this.
Yeah.
A large teaching and research university, especially an urban institution like BU. But it truly reinforces what those guiding principles are way back from our Methodist roots, that this matters.
I have a question for you. You urban campus. Sometimes people will visit BU and they'll say it doesn't have a campus. And then other times people will visit and they say it does have a campus. You get both, sometimes they kind of group it in with NYU doesn't have a campus, and then say, no, it's very different from NYU. What are your thoughts on that question? Does BU have a campus?
BU does have a campus. It's an urban campus.
Mm-hmm.
So students have to think about what kind of campus, what location, what their day-to-day experience, what speaks to them. We are our campus is pretty well defined. We're not spread throughout the city of Boston. So that is easier to define than maybe some other urban universities. We do have our green space, the BU Beach, the famous BU Beach, which isn't really a beach, but it looks over the Charles River, and it's a big green space where students can go out with their frisbees and hacky sacks and sit in some of the Adirondack chairs that we have out there, and faculty take classes outdoors. But it definitely is an urban campus. So if a student's looking for that hustle and bustle and sort of that vibe of a city, they've got it, and they can hop on the subway and be in downtown Boston in just 3 or 4 stops. And what I love about Boston, I'm not a native Bostonian. I moved to Boston to go to grad school, and here I am 44 years
Hard to believe.
with this amazing city. But it's such a walkable city, which I also, it's smaller and more compact. I mean, you can walk and be in Back Bay and, going to restaurants in less than 30 minutes. It's an easy walk. And so I love that BU is part of the city of Boston, but also that students can take a very tranquil walk along the river, along the Esplanade. You get a little bit of both, a yin and yang on our campus, but it's definitely urban. So if you want high mountains and rolling hills, we are not for you. But if you want to be part of an urban campus, BU is a great institution.
And you've partially answered this already, but BU is one of the larger private schools in the country, and then it is also urban, so can be a lot of distractions pulling you away. How would you say BU intentionally works to create community?
I think students, I talk to hundreds of students each and every year, and some know without a doubt that they want to attend a larger university. They already understand what that means, the resources of a prestigious, highly ranked teaching and research university. Those resources they know about. But they sometimes still worry about our size and how are they going to fit in and how are they going to find their people. And it actually happens far more quickly than students imagine. And part of it is the way that the university is structured and organized. We're not just one big institution with 17,000 undergraduates. We have 10 undergraduate schools and colleges. And some of those schools and colleges are actually smaller than some students' high schools.
That's right.
Our School of Education, we bring in a first-year class of about 70 students. Even our College of Communications brings in a first-year class of about 300. Now, that size grows as students have epiphanies and realize they really want to do television and film or public relations or whatever. And again, there's that seamless transfer. But the school-college model helps break down the size of the university into more manageable units, first of all. Secondly, we have made a very, very strong commitment in undergraduate education. And that means we, to the best of our ability, try to keep our average class sizes as small as possible. And our average class size is 30. That is almost the same size you might hear at a small liberal arts college.
That's right.
And that is a significant investment that the university makes. It means we have to have the right number of faculty. And by the way, most of our classes are taught by full faculty, not by teaching fellows. I mean, we obviously have teaching fellows because we offer PhD programs and they need to get teaching experience, but that's mostly in labs and discussion sections, but not as primary instructors. And so that means our student faculty ratio is only 10-1. Again, very small for an institution of our size. So that's another way. By having these smaller classes, students get to know their classmates, their professors, the professors know them by name. And then, of course, there's the residence hall system. So residence halls at BU, we guarantee for all 4 years. And those communities, students, that becomes their family. That's their home away from home during their 4 years. And so that's another way that the university breaks down into these smaller units. And so it becomes, students describe BU as a large university made up of dozens of smaller communities. And that's how students navigate BU.
Another thing oftentimes students will talk about is East Campus, Central Campus, West Campus. Talk to us about the differences between East, Central, and West.
I will say probably there are definitely personality differences in the residence halls, and that's probably more distinguishing than the East-West aspects of our campus, that at least in my opinion. So when I think about West Campus, the kind of student that's drawn to West Campus either A, is all about athletics and wanting to be near the athletic facilities, our fitness and recreation complex, because they know they're going to get there every day. There's another student that loves West Campus, and that's the student that likes to feel at the end of the day, they're going home. They're leaving their studies and their classrooms and their labs behind because it's a little bit more of a walk from Central Campus. So I think of students that might be a little bit more independent, wanting to live up on West Campus. So that's one thing I think about. The Central Campus students, which I think are the students that they want to roll out of bed and be in class in 5 minutes. They want to be the center of all the activity. They don't mind being in the largest residence hall on campus, which is Warren Towers, but they want to be in the middle of everything. And then when I think about the students, you said East, West, South. So South Campus, that is less for first-year students because South Campus is where you find a lot of our apartment style residences. So that will be for our transfer students, our upper class students. They're not your traditional dorms. They don't have dining halls. Students have kitchens. So especially our upper class students who are ready to have more of that apartment vibe, live on their own, cook for themselves, is very appealing for them in terms of South Campus.
Absolutely.
Now, friends, as you can tell, and I never edited it out, but Kelly had something come up really unexpected at the end, so we had to stop for now. We are going to come back and do a part 2. We actually just made it halfway through everything we were going to cover, but it may be a while. So we're going to run part 1 now, as you obviously know. We want to do that because we want those of you who may be making a decision about BU to be armed with the knowledge that you've learned, especially if you're in the class of 2026. But you can expect us to come back and have a final part to finish out our interview with someone who might be, she's actually in year 45 now. It was 44 when we started the recording. But she's as energetic and exuberant and vivacious, full of energy as a 23 or 24-year-old. So just a wealth of knowledge. And so Susan and I do want to come back and let you hear part 2 of that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this interview with Kelly. On Monday's episode, I'm going to take you through the process I take my students through when they send me a spreadsheet, which, by the way, I love and I find extremely helpful. And the spreadsheet has all the acceptances on it, and it has usually the cost of the school, and it has any need-based aid or merit-based aid award they got, the final amount the college is asking them to pay, and they just kind of want to have that cost talk. And they want to talk through that process. Now, I'm not going to get into the appeal on this because we've done that multiple times, but I'm going to talk about how you can make sure you're comparing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. So there are a few very, very important things you need to know to make sure you truly are comparing the true costs from one school to another. So I'm going to talk to you guys about that on Monday's episode. And then for our interview, it's part 2 of 4, my interview with Katie, Amy, Joe, and Reed about playing a sport in college. Friends, I close you out with this. When I was in high school, I used to be hardcore at running track. one thing about me, there's something I do extremely well, and there's something I do abysmally. I'm pretty abysmal when it comes to balance. I've never been good at balance. When I was a young kid, I remember being 4, 5, 6, and my mom would say, "You have a one-track mind. You have a one-track mind." That's just kind of how I'm wired. But one thing I do really well is commitment. So when I do something, whether it's this podcast or learning college admissions or gardening, I'm going to be all in. So I was really committed. Track, it was hardcore all year, indoor, outdoor track clubs. I remember, I tried to see if I could go move and live with Dave. A long timers know Dave is my really good friend and former co-host on this podcast, because the best track club in all of Canada was close to him. I wanted to spend my junior year living there, and it just didn't quite work out. But yeah, I was all in. And so when I got to college, I ran track at Michigan State, but I was a jumper. I had good hops. I could leap. So my best events were triple jump, high jump, long jump. I did do sprints in high school, but high school and college are completely different. But I'm in college. On Tuesdays, we had to work out with the sprinters, and we had the fastest mile relay team in the country. That's right. Anyone who knows track knows this is blazing hot. All 4 of our 400-meter runners were sub 46. That's right. 45.1, 45.3, 45.7, 45.9. They were all sub 46 quarter milers. And I had to train with those guys. So my single biggest memory from that experience is how they would just blow by me on the straightaway on the indoor track in Jennison Fieldhouse. And so much to the point where one day my pride was so badly hurt, I faked an injury. I sure did. I faked a hamstring to go to the trainer because my ego just couldn't take getting blown by Marcus and those guys. So that's my single biggest memory, my bruised ego. Oh, my goodness. But the second thing that I remember the most was what the sprint coach used to always say over and over and over and over. And what he would say is this: run through the tape. Run through the tape. Now, if you've watched any track meets, and this could be the hurdles, this could be the 100, the 2, the 4, relays, anything, there's what we call the tape. And think of the tape as like a piece of tape, right, that goes across the finish line. The reason why they have the tape is because sometimes there's photo finishes and it's really close, and you need the camera to actually see who actually won, and it's hard to kind of look down on the ground and use the line on the ground. So it's parallel to the line on the ground, but it's up about like chest level. So it's easier when you're going to the camera to see who actually wins by looking at the tape. Now, one thing that's really, really common, and it's human nature, and that is you've been working really, really hard. This could be a marathon. It could be a 5K, 10K. It doesn't matter really what the race is. But you see that finish line, and you just breathe. You take a sigh of relief, because you can let up. You can chill. You can go on cruise control. And anybody who has watched enough track meets knows there's somebody, they see that finish line, they let up, they slow down those last few steps, and they didn't see somebody else on the side that just blew by them and gets to the tape first and beats them and wins the race. So, friends, it's March, and the weather's getting better. Seniors, you're tired. You've been working for 4 years. You might be sick of your high school. And senior slump is real. Senioritis, another term we use for it, is real. Every fiber of your being wants to just take your foot off the gas pedal and just cruise. What does that mean? Maybe I don't turn in that assignment on time. Or maybe I study 1 hour when I really know that this test really needs 6 to 8 hours. Or maybe I start that paper the night before. You don't want to have a conversation like I've had twice in the last 6 years. Fortunately, 3 times in the last 6 years, but twice unsuccessfully. Yeah. Student from California who had Yale rescind an offer because they took a nosedive in the spring of their senior semester, or another student from Florida who saw Pomona rescind their offer because senior year grades just tanked so badly. And last year, now both of those were in 2021. 2021. So 5 years ago. One was 2021 and one was 2022. Now I try to scare the bejesus out of people so that doesn't happen. But it almost happened last year to a student from Virginia. I was really scared. Fortunately, they allowed him to come, but boy, they scared the life out of him with the essays they made him write and explain to him why his grades went down so much in the spring of his senior year. I hope to never be a part of another conversation like that, and I don't want that to happen to you. So parents, if you have a senior, I want you to get them and ask them to listen to this whole segment I'm doing. And just know I have one tidbit of advice for you seniors, and it's the same advice the Michigan State track coach gave me in the 80s. Run through the tape. Run through the tape. Run through the tape and finish strong. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.com website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.